Metal Gear Solid Delta has failed. And now it's time that we process why. What exactly has happened with this remake? Why exactly are hardcore fans like myself avoiding it? And why exactly are game journos turning their backs on Hideo Kojima's masterwork? So to recap, I have not played Metal Gear Solid 3 Delta. I haven't seen a whole lot of it. I didn't even know it was coming out this week. I really thought it would be coming out like later in the year, but I suppose this year has just flown by. There, this remake to me, right from the get go, felt completely pointless because Metal Gear Solid 3 was just released on the Metal Gear Solid Collection. That was the bundled in with other Metal Gear games that give you the full context of the story and the characters and all of that. And everything we saw from Metal Gear Delta going into it seems to indicate that the developers didn't really have any idea of what they wanted to do. So instead of a proper remake that really improves on and expands on the original release, it is more like a remaster, honestly, because everything I've seen from it seems to indicate that the gameplay is the same, the plot's the same, the voice acting is the same. It feels almost as if the developers were scared to move away from the original script to evolve it to do anything new, original, and exciting. And there's a reason for that because they knew that if they did anything to change the plot or the story, Kojima fans would have immediately been up in arms about it. And I myself said the same thing. The only time I was ever optimistic that this game might be good was because they were keeping the original voice actors. And it's not necessarily because I think the original game is flawless or that it couldn't be expanded on. Like, I just have absolutely no faith in Konami to improve on or do anything new with Metal Gear Solid 3. Harmon Smith, my problem with this remake has always been like what the point of it all was. Because it didn't feel like this was being re released for a new audience. This didn't feel like it was made for new fans. Like, why could they not just stick with the original release? Why could they not just produce a new game? And from my perspective, what I would have done as a creator is if you're going to remake Metal Gear Solid 3, which is the earliest game in the timeline, if you're going to remake Metal Gear Solid 3, you should have remade it to keep everything that happened afterward. You should have implemented those elements and made it more cohesive and more interesting. There were a lot of lore changes in, Peace Walker and Metal Gear Solid 5 and things of that nature that could have been like blended in a lot better with Metal Gear Solid 3 because I think it's very clear considering like how those games turned out that a lot of things in MGS3 weren't necessarily planned out ahead of time and don't necessarily make a whole lot of sense. In fact, that's kind of how I would have approached these Metal Gear remakes in general is like there were always lots of weird like lore inconsistencies and like weird details about like these games, especially in Metal Gear Solid 1, going from like considering how it's a reboot, but the original games are still canon. There was, I think, considering how long it's been since Metal Gear Solid 1's release, I really have to ask, why didn't they remake Metal Gear Solid 1 first? Why didn't they take that game, improve on it, and do new things with that instead of just doing this paper thin, transparent remastering of Metal Gear Solid 3. There are, as a fan, a lot of other things that I would have rather seen them do than this. I do think that the Metal Gear IP is kind of stagnant and hasn't really grown and evolved past Kojima's vision. I do think, in a sense, Kojima has been a major reason why this IP has stopped developing after Metal Gear Solid 3. Because after Metal Gear Solid 3 is when Kojima started taking more power at Konami, that he started becoming more influential, that Westerners knew his name, that he was like considered this big like game design guru, which really, if you look into it even a little bit, isn't exactly true. I think most video games, well, all video games are designed by entire teams of people, all of whom contribute their own talents and sensibilities. And weirdly enough, I think Kojima takes credit for a lot of the things other people do, especially when it comes to like the script and the story and the themes and stuff like that. Playing Metal Gear Solid 2 again, I was shocked by how all the memorable, interesting things that people remember about the game, the good aspects that stick with people and that people like, point to as an example of how great Metal Gear Solid 2 actually is. A lot of those were made by the codec writer who was not Kojima. Like when you see the cinematics and you see how lazy and poorly written they are, and then compare them to like the very well nuanced, paced, engaging like codec conversations, like the difference is palpable. Like in Metal Gear Solid 2. And that's just one example that I've noticed replaying these games in recent years. But like Metal Gear put Kojima on a pedestal so much and defined him as like the visionary for the franchise that it really limited Konami's ability to do anything new with the brand going forward. So, from the perspective of a fan, the reason the Metal Gear IP has fallen off in recent years, actually in the past 20 years, I don't think they've produced a good Metal Gear game since Metal Gear Solid 3. The reason Metal Gear has fallen off in recent years is because that they stopped producing good video games. And all of that is entirely on Hideo Kojima and his decisions while he was at Konami. There is no getting around it. There is no avoiding it. That is the reality of the situation. But of course, as we know, that is like a hardcore fan perspective. Why are normies getting upset about Metal Gear Solid 3 Delta? Why are they not like worshiping this game the way they did, say, Silent Hill 2 Remake or Resident Evil 4 Remake, both of which were like just abysmally terrible and were just completely disrespected the original work and all the effort that went into creating those masterpieces. Why is Metal Gear Solid 3 Delta different in that regard? Why are critics being a bit more cagey with this release than they are other remakes? What exactly is going on here? Well, the video game journalism industry, at least in the West, I'm sure it's a little bit different in Japan. In the West, there is this major push to kind of deify Hideo Kojima and prop him up as like the greatest game designer in the world. He is the Hollywood type there. He is cutting edge. He's an innovator, man. He's a genius. He's a genius, man. He's a mad genius. Video game journalists threw all of their weight behind supporting Hideo Kojima 10 years ago with the failure of Metal Gear Solid 5, right? A game that had a budget higher than Grand Theft Auto 5, apparently. Metal Gear Solid 5 was the last time Konami was really taken seriously or respected by the video game industry at large, right? Like Konami has been written off and ignored because of the Hideo Kojima situation. Nobody was happy about Kojima leaving Konami at the time. Nobody was happy with that situation. But game journos made the conscious decision to support Hideo Kojima throughout this situation. Kojima established his new studio. Sony partnered with him. He made a new gaming IP, Death Stranding. And all along the way, game journos were sitting there worshiping him and acting like Kojima could do no wrong and that nothing was and that everything was going to be great, and that Death Stranding was going to be an IP that was just as good or better than Metal Gear Solid, right? That was the mindset that game journals took going into this, is that they sided with Kojima wholeheartedly and propped up the image of him being one of the biggest names in video games, completely disregarding whether or not that was actually true, because any actual fan can sit there and tell you that Hideo Kojima has not put out a banger in a long time. Death Stranding did not light the world on fire. It was not some revolutionary new IP. It was not some new genre of video game like it was purported by Kojima himself, right? It was just this pretentious, poorly written mess that kind of exemplifies everything that's wrong with Kojima as a creator. And fans, or journos rather, seem very much unwilling to acknowledge it, because to them, Death Stranding and Hideo Kojima is everything they want gaming to be. It is overly political propaganda. It is woke. It has very limited gameplay. It's not all that engaging to actual players, right? This is everything the game journal industry wants to see video games turn into, and Kojima kind of exemplifies this mindset. He has done everything he possibly can to fit in with the Hollywood Marxists, and game journals don't care about the state of Metal Gear, of Konami, of the decline of Kojima's career, and the current state of video games. What they want is to normalize their worldview onto the masses. And they have found that Hideo Kojima's legend is something they can use to kind of prop up their narratives about abusive companies, about the problems in video game development, the visionary of the art, like the legend of this artist. This is something that they feel that they can use to kind of further their agenda, and as a result of that, that has led them to defending and hyping up Hideo Kojima long after he's become irrelevant. This guy is 65 now and has not produced a good game in 20 years. Okay, Metal Gear Solid 3 came out in like what, 2005, 2004, something like that. Great game, like especially at the time, really cutting edge, great visuals, great voice acting, great boss fights. There's a lot to like about Metal Gear Solid 3, but we as gamers really need to move past this mindset that this was the greatest game of all time. Or more specifically, there was a time when it was one of the greatest games of all time. Absolutely. But the industry has grown and evolved so much that I don't feel as if it is anymore. We always refer to like the greatest games of all time, meaning as if this is the greatest game ever or forever, as in like this game comes out, is declared the best of all time, and that means it'll always hold that status. And I think there's a lot of games in the past 20 years that no longer really deserve that distinction. And playing the base version of Metal Gear Solid 3 again, experiencing this game again, seeing how a lot of it has aged, like most particularly the story and themes, like the antagonist of this game won't stop gushing about how like, oh man, we're no longer at war. We're not going to be at war with Russia in the future. In the future, there's no such thing as an enemy. And like, meanwhile, in the modern day, we are, like making the boss's entire point like just completely fall apart. That was a perfectly reasonable position to take at the time of like 2004. This idea that like, oh, we're not going to be at war with Russia forever, man. But here we are. It's it's kind of interesting to kind of think about this kind of stuff, like in this day and age, like with the power of hindsight and like changing historical perspectives, like a game that audiences really resonated with and really genuinely enjoyed back in 2004 like no longer holds the same weight that it does in 2025. It's just not a cutting edge product anymore. It is showing its age. And I think as fans, it is our responsibility to kind of point this stuff out and acknowledge that, Metal Gear Solid 3, for all of its for all the fun we've had with it over the years and how much we enjoy it, it is by no means flawless. It is not like a game that will stand the test of time and will be studied like in universities like 100 years from now. Like it's just not that impactful. And I do think there is a lot of value in analyzing just where it went wrong and just acknowledging like Kojima's strengths and weaknesses as a creator and acknowledging that it's okay to enjoy things that aren't the all-time greats. Like that's kind of my feeling on this. Like thinking about this kind of thing is that like, like I've seen a lot of people like argue for and against Metal Gear Solid 3 in this regard, but for this remake. But I think the important thing to take away from this is that we don't necessarily need to protect or condemn this game because no matter what happens, it is going to be forgotten by younger audiences. It's not going to endure the ages as the greatest games of all time. The only thing that really matters is that this game is fun, that you enjoy playing it, that you enjoy discussing it with friends, that you enjoy like what it does for you as an individual. Like I don't think this game should necessarily be treated as a major cultural gaming cultural landmark. I feel as if like that kind of thing happens organically. I don't think we really need to put this game on a pedestal and to like defend it, and especially not unnecessarily remake it and try and sell it to a new audience that really has no interest in it. And that's kind of my perspective, looking at this remake and looking at what they tried to do here. Like, if you want to sell Metal Gear to a younger audience, you're going to have to come up with a completely new original title. This is never going to bring younger people in. People are not going to be interested in this paper thin remaster of a classic PS2 game. Like people, like the developers need to buckle down and produce a high quality new project that makes Metal Gear fresh and exciting again. That is the only thing that is going to keep Metal Gear famous going forward.